Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Levine. I am a licensed independent addiction counselor and certified life coach, and I'm here today with Rodney. And so we're going to have a little conversation. Hopefully you'll get to know me and learn a little bit about what I do.
Hey, Mark, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with everybody. You are one of our newer practitioners within the community. I know that there are a lot of people, whether they're either personally dealing with drug addiction, whether it's opioids, any number of combinations of drugs that are out there. I, being clean and sober for 26 years, I know what that's like, going to AA meetings, having family members like my father who first got started, and several other people as we all end up meeting. So let me ask you a few questions just to give people an idea of how you can help them more specifically. But before we get into that, what is it that got you started? What is it that drew you to this, to make this basically your life's career?
Well, I've been helping people in various professional ways all my life. And so it was really kind of some of my own struggles that pushed me into the direction of helping people with addictions. And I had somebody that I really trusted that kind of helped me decide to go back to school and get a master's in addiction counseling. And from there, which I did that about, 18, 17 years ago, something like that. So I've been doing this kind of work ever since. And it's been the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done.
That's awesome. So what is it like with your background? Do people, for this type of therapeutic services, is this something they have to see like an MD? Do they have to have a doctor in this nature? What are those little distinctions really quick, just so people understand like what type of services you offer and what you're licensed to do?
Sure. So most people, when they go for treatment for addiction, or if they're family members that are looking for help, are going to go to somebody who's been trained in working in that field. And so that's what a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor can do. So the independent part means that I can hang up my own shingle and I can do that independently. And I'm a supervisor myself, so that way I can reach out to the community one-to-one. So people don't generally go to a physician for addiction treatment, although there are times when medication may be helpful, and so somebody might be referred to a physician in that regard, but that wouldn't be the primary person to be involved in a treatment. So I have the ability to be able to help engage individuals and family members in understanding what's involved and then helping them reach their own goals. So I will say that, listen, 1 out of 2 Americans know somebody that has an addiction. Either that's a family member or a friend. And then of course there's millions of people that have one themselves. So that's a large amount of the population that are people that are needing help.
No, I mean, and that's again, we don't really have somebody like you that can kind of fit that mold. So if I'm somebody who's, maybe even myself, or maybe I'm working, or I have a family member who's interested in coming to you, are you doing these sessions? I know with all the stuff going on right now, are you doing these online? Are you doing groups? Are you doing individuals? Are these family? Are there certain areas or certain ways that you go about approaching this?
Sure. So I have been doing a combination of in-person and online long before there was a pandemic. So, but now during this particular crisis, all of my sessions are online. So safety for myself and for my clients. So the approach is really, it's going to be individualized. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a situation. So everybody comes to me from their own unique circumstances. So for example, somebody may come to me and say, hey, I know I'm drinking too much and it's causing me hangovers, I'm blacking out, I'm having these kind of negative consequences, but I don't want to quit. Well, I may listen to their history and say, hey, listen, your drinking sounds really bad, but I'm going to keep part of that to myself because I want to just hear where they're coming from. So if somebody says to me, hey, I want to just cut down, that's where you meet somebody. The idea of harm reduction is meeting somebody where they are, but not leaving them there. And so if somebody comes to me and wants that approach, that's where I'm going to start. Sometimes people come to me and say, hey, I know I need to stop and never drink again, or never use again. And then that we can work from that framework. But oftentimes it takes a while that people don't always know themselves what they want, and they kind of start and stop. And oftentimes when we're making these changes, it's not always that clear cut. And so ambivalence in that process is extremely normal. And so always rolling with that ambivalence and trying to kind of take that and use it in a way that's going to be helpful and productive. So if somebody isn't sure, but they're kind of leaning towards, hey, I really want to cut back or quit, then we'll work with that piece of it. But it's certainly normal for people not to always know when they first start where they're going to end up. So my approach is to just kind of listen first, see them where they are, and then help them decide from there.
So yeah, you said a lot of things here, and one size does not fit all.
Absolutely.
Two, you're meeting people where they're at, which is very important. And I know even when I'm talking to people, it's always learning about them first, understanding where they're at, especially if somebody's coming to me with a problem. Everybody has their unique way of being able to help guide somebody mentally, or showing them a visual or whatever that is, an analogy, to help them to be able to understand the communication that you're getting across, and understanding also that you're just out for their best interest, and you're trying to do, what they ultimately want to get to, which is, hey, I want to feel better. I want to not have a dependency on food or this cigarette or this, whatever that is for them. And so it's great that you take that individualized but comprehensive approach with this. So what kind of clients would you say that you like to work with more specifically?
I love all ages, and I work with both men and women. So what I see the most in the last couple years since I've gone into private practice has really been alcohol. That seems to be the biggest problem, although opioids and heroin get a lot of press, and rightly so because of the immediacy, how fatal it can be. In private practice, what I tend to see more than anything else is alcohol. And alcohol has really exploded as far as its how far it's pervaded over the entire society. We know that there's like bars and on every corner down and over the Rhine, and in places all over the city. But the problem that most people aren't aware of is that deaths from alcohol has dramatically increased over the last few years. And so I really want that kind of press to get out there as well, because those are the people that I'm getting seen. I'm oftentimes getting called by family members who are concerned about spouses, siblings, or maybe it's their parents or their children who have an alcohol problem, and they're looking for help first, sometimes before I even see the person that has a problem.
Right. Now, are you dealing with also, I noticed that there's a lot of suicide rates going on. That seems to have been increasing. I could be off from my last statistic that I looked at, but we see a lot of that related to drug abuse, because, utilizing a drug, utilizing something that allows you to escape, as we mentally think that we're doing. Really what people are doing is trying to be more in the present to where they're not thinking about a bunch of stuff, but we feel like we have to ingest or smoke or do something to us ourselves to take us away. Are you working with, or do you seeing more of this from people who are retirees out of the military, people leaving out of the military, that sort of thing? are you dealing with, is there a certain segment of the population that you see more of this? And what are you doing more specifically to get into, I don't know, just a little bit of like, what would I anticipate? I'm sorry, I'm asking you two different questions here, so apologize for that, Mark. So what kind of clients are more specifically coming through your doors? And more importantly, let me ask you this question. What is it that you're seeing that people are gravitating towards in what you're doing and the approaches that you're making that are leaving such a profound difference in their lives?
Okay, well, so first of all, let me take the question about you made a proper link between suicide and veterans, and we know that this is a huge problem. I worked actually for 12 years at Joseph House, which is a residential treatment program for homeless veterans. So that was something that we were certainly more aware of in that population. I haven't seen that much of a problem of the people that are coming through my office door with suicide, but of course that's always a question that gets asked. The first time I meet somebody, it's a 2-hour assessment. And so it's a holistic approach of going through their entire life as much as I can, and not just asking, hey, how much do you drink? But it's really trying to get to know the person. And one thing I just kind of want to highlight is that, and maybe this goes to part of your second question, but there's lots of different techniques and things that can be used out there to help people. But the single most important thing is developing a therapeutic relationship with the individual that's sitting in your office or sitting remotely across on your TV screen, on your monitor, because that's where therapy happens. When there's a connection between the client and the therapist, then work can get done. And so that's always my goal in the first session that I'm meeting them. And even though I'm asking a lot of questions, it's really about listening to them and engaging them. So I might have an order of like, this is all the things that I need to get. But if somebody gives me an answer and it takes me in a different direction, I'm going to go with that just so I can help get to really understand that person and to create the bond that's going to allow us to talk about really difficult subjects. Because I kind of go back to the military part too, and we talk about courage a lot in therapy. And courage really has nothing to do with military or war or battle. It means telling your story from your heart. And you're only going to be able to do that with somebody you feel comfortable with. And so that's kind of the whole purpose of the first couple sessions, is really to be able to build that kind of a relationship so somebody feels comfortable being vulnerable and talking about difficult things. Because let's face it, addiction is all about avoiding difficult things. So here's one more thing, and so you want to make it as comfortable as possible for somebody to share things that they may not want to share with family members or friends.
Well, and that's the difficult part is, I think for anybody, is the level of honesty that you are with yourself. Again, like when I started and got into AA, the first thing was, hey, just admit that you have a problem with alcohol, and it's okay. Like when I would tell people, several years down the road, but, they were like, hey, they would ask me if I want a drink. And I'd say, no. I said, I don't drink. And they're like, what are you, an alcoholic or something? I said, actually, I am, and then the next question is like, what are you doing in here? Because anyhow, but my point in that was that, everybody takes it in their own way. Everybody takes their own path, their own process, their time, all those pieces. And, I'm glad that you take that individualized approach. Again, not to get back to that, but it's just a very important key factor. I know when I was going through AA, it wasn't just acknowledging that, hey, I'm an alcoholic, but it's being okay that you are an alcoholic or that you do have a drug addiction. Not only that, but it was a blessing more importantly to me. I started seeing it and appreciating that, hey, God, thank you so much for allowing me to even recognize this. Not only that, but, thanks for giving me the strength to get through this with Mark or whoever, AA meetings or a combination of those things. And so, but that's the hard part I dealt with, is just, I have to be honest with myself at all times. Even today, if I notice that I'm upset about something, what am I really upset about? And being vulnerable is such a difficult thing. And I think it's more so for men, because
Yes,
we're taught to be strong and don't
exactly.
cry and,
Right.
only display this. And I know men are starting to shift, and getting more female energy, if you want to call it, the yin and yang balance. And so what would you have to say what are you seeing in those regards with people as they go through your program?
Well, so when I see people in my private practice, I hear what you're saying about the honesty piece, and I oftentimes will hear this from parents sometimes of the adult children that are seeing me, where, well, if only he won't lie, just be honest about things. And what I try to explain is that, and I say this to parents all the time, is all behaviors make sense. And so even if they don't make sense to you, they make sense to that person in that time. So everything that we do, somebody looking from the outside may think, well, why are you doing that? But it makes sense to us in the present moment. And so when you can understand why somebody maybe is lying about something, then you can kind of meet them at a place where you can engage in a conversation. I mean, I sometimes joke with my clients that, or particularly the family members, that 110% of my clients lie to me. And that's because, look, it's not just in the they're going to walk in and just say, well, I'm just not going to tell them the truth about how much I drank over the week or whatever. It's just, sometimes we just don't even realize that, hey, we're holding something back. And so I'm going to recognize that off the start, that it's hard to just vomit up every piece of truth and hardship that you've ever had to deal with and what's going on with you. And so sometimes we hold things back a little bit. And so
a lot of that could be subconsciously, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. Even if I went in and I wanted to see a new doctor, a new practitioner, right? There's still some things that I don't, maybe, oh man, I don't want to tell them I'm doing this, or I don't want to tell them I'm eating this Big Mac, or whatever that is, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think when people go into their primary care physician, they lie all the time about how much they're drinking or what their drug use is, because they don't want to get into a conversation. And then the other part is that the physician generally doesn't know what to do with them. So it doesn't end up being a fruitful conversation there. But so it is kind of, it takes a while for somebody to trust you. And so sometimes that means sharing some things that personal to try to help with, but oftentimes it's just really just being with that person over time, and they begin to see, hey, I told him this and he didn't judge me and didn't shame me or anything like that, and then begin to get more comfortable about opening up. And so it takes time, and I have to recognize that from the beginning, that's why addiction treatment is not something that's just going to be solved in 1 or 2 sessions, or whatever an insurance company might think is going to happen in 28 magical days. But it takes time to build those relationships so that you can be able to feel comfortable to talk about the difficult things. And so we were talking about approaching before, Rodney, and I like to use kind of a mindfulness-based approach, which is, so one, it's about accepting what's happened in their life, and but doing it in a non-judgmental way, because most people, by the time they get to treatment, have this inner critic that has beaten them up so badly and said so many negative things, that we want to get to the point where try to teach people how to talk compassionately to themselves. So self-compassion is a huge part of any kind of treatment. Learning how to just to be okay with whatever it is that's going on, to acknowledge your feelings and to see them, to recognize that all thoughts that come through your head aren't facts. And so a kind of this mindfulness-based approach allows people to take a step back and to be able to see things without judging themselves, but just to notice what's going on. And it becomes much easier than to be able to take the proper steps forward when without that judgment piece.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You actually touch on, you probably help people who I mean, with the things that you're talking about, it's almost like these are the same types of things we should be just doing in our relationships, period, because
Yeah.
we do this in our
Right. Oh,
relationships,
absolutely.
whether there's
Absolutely.
alcohol involved or not. Well, no,
Absolutely.
and giving people that freedom to, I love the point that you made. It may not make sense to me, but it's making sense to them. So I need to get out of my righteous opinion or stance and be able to, again, try to do my best to hear what they have to say and try to really understand.
Exactly. And that's oftentimes kind of where I start with family members. And if you would, you take a look at the list of maybe reasons why somebody is using a particular drug or alcohol, what the benefits they're getting out of it. And if you just saw that list and you said to somebody, hey, somebody's trying to solve these problems that they have, you would think like, oh, that makes sense. But then if you say, oh, and they're drinking to do that, and all of a sudden all this judgment and blame comes in and shaming, when the reality is people are trying to get their needs met. Just happens that now it's being done in an unhealthy way, but
Right.
the needs themselves make perfect sense. I want to be accepted. I don't want to have to deal with these negative emotions. I want to sleep better. We could go on. And all those things, pretty normal.
Now, one of the things that I learned for myself, Mark, in my process of 49 years is I did some work with a company called Landmark Education. It's done around the world. But one of the things I recognized, or they allowed me to recognize, was my own stories. And you kind of touched on that a little bit. You described it in some other fashion. It's kind of like, so X happens, right? Something happens. And then we, of course, have a meaning. Okay, so I walk down the street. I see that a dog attacks somebody, and now I have this opinion that those types of dogs are bad dogs, right? Mm-hmm. Or I'm a little boy, daddy, suddenly daddy comes up, he's scared and he spanks me. Daddy doesn't love me anymore, right? So it may not be the absolute truth, right? Because many of us have gone through our lives, and pretty soon you talk to your parents and you're like, I never meant that. I wasn't trying to tell you I didn't love you, or, right. Whatever stories that we've created up.
Right.
And so it's being able to recognize also for myself was like, what story am I running? Even today, I ask myself that all the time, like, okay, what story am I running that's debilitating me? What story am I running that is making me feel anxiety, depression, any number of different things? And believe me,
absolutely.
Just when you think you got it, whoosh, it just grabs a hold of you and pulls you back in, kind of thing. So
no, that's beautiful, because I do that all the time, is and asking people, what is the story that you're telling yourself? And then it's also about looking at the roles of the other people in the story. And can you begin to kind of take a look at what are the needs of everybody else in your story? And then when you begin to see things from somebody else's perspective, it allows you to now be able to say, okay, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to be as angry about what's going on, or I don't need to be resentful, that I can begin to understand that everybody else in my story has needs as well. And maybe they're not expressing it in the best way, but but taking a look at all the different pieces about what's going on. So stories are that whole concept is very valuable.
So Mark, you're also a life coach. What do you do, or what do you offer with life coaching? Or is this kind of like a combination of things? So I know you deal with so many different little pieces.
Well, so I kind of got interested in mindfulness. I don't even know how many years it's been now, because I always loved reading about the brain. And so this was just something that I recognized its value of it and started doing it for myself, and then brought it into the agency that I worked at. And when I went into private practice, I didn't want to stop doing that to help people. So I will work with individuals who are just dealing with stress or anxiety, or maybe feeling depressed, or have chronic pain. And these are all things that we know mindfulness approach can be very helpful. And so I'll kind of work with somebody in that respect, and go through some of the foundational attitudes of mindfulness, and present them with a list, and kind of say, okay, so, which parts of these maybe are missing from your life or could be really helpful, or what do you want to work on that would be useful? And so that can often be a really great place to jump off from and to be able to deal with this, the particular stress that they're having. So sometimes I get people who come to see me, they might have been having physical pain that turns out to be really the main source of it is stress, or that stress is severely aggravating the already underlying pain that is there. And so one of the kind of, I jokes like the mathematical equation, if you will, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. So when I can teach people, okay, listen, pain is a part of life, but the suffering piece is purely optional. So when you no longer resist the fact that the reality of what's going on, it's kind of like, hey, with the virus that's happening right now, there's a lot of pain that's happening because we can't do our lives the way we normally do. And if you just keep getting mad about it, then it just actually makes everything worse. And now we're suffering. But if you say, okay, here's the pain, here's the reality of what's happening. I'm going to kind of embrace the suck, as it will, and not fight it. And then that way it allows me to actually be able to handle it and deal with it in a much healthier way. And I'm not going to be suffering. And then I'm not going to be having as much physical or emotional pain.
Yeah, and sometimes it's you're dealing with whether you're upset, angry, sad, whatever that is. I remember a guy telling me one time, he's like, Rodney, if you're going to be angry, be really angry. That doesn't mean go and destroy stuff, but if that's what you got to do, some people take it to the nth degree. Of course, they end up in jail and all sorts of stuff. But there is a healthy way of being able to say, you know what, I'm really angry right now and I need to go and just get it out. What are some healthy ways for people, whether they're dealing with anger, whether they're just frustrated, whether they're just, I don't know, you deal with some more of those.
I mean, so,
I'll let you.
So, you know, one of the things that can be very helpful whenever you're feeling stress for whatever reason, and it could be any one of those things that's going on, is an acronym called S.T.O.P. And so S.T.O.P. The S stands for stop. So once you recognize that you're revved up in some way, that, you know, your sympathetic nervous system is sending out adrenaline and you're angry, frustrated, irritated, whatever, stop for a moment. T is take some breaths. And so when we inhale, we're activating our sympathetic nervous system, which makes our heart rate go up. When we exhale, that's activating our parasympathetic nervous system that makes our heart rate go down. So when you take these breaths in this moment, you want to make sure that the exhales are a little bit longer than the inhale. And so I try to tell people, hey, take 5 or 6 good breaths, count 4 to inhale, 6 to exhale, or some version of that. And when you do that, without your permission, your heart rate's going to go down, your blood pressure is going to drop a little bit. And that gives you a little bit better framework to then go to the next step, which is the O, which is observe. And so I ask people, well, observe what's going on. What are you feeling in your body? Where's that tension in your body, or where does it manifest itself? So when people tell me they get angry or whatever, and I'll say, well, where does that live inside of you? And maybe carried in your jaw or your back or your neck. So notice what's going on. Notice the feeling that you're experiencing. And it helps to sometimes to name it. So much of the stuff that we carry is subconscious. And so we're irritated, frustrated, and mad or whatever, but we don't actually say, oh, you know, I'm really angry about this. And then once you name it, it kind of, there's a phrase, if you name it, you tame it. And so you take a little bit of the edge off of it. And so I've looked at sensations in my body. I've kind of identified what the feeling is that's going on. I'm going to look at the thoughts that are going on in my head as well. And so recognizing that all thoughts are not facts is a really crucial piece. So we're just kind of going back to the story part that you were saying. It's like, okay, so what are the thoughts that I'm telling myself right now? And so once I've observed all that, and that literally just takes a couple seconds to do all that, now I can do the P, which is proceed mindfully. So now I'm making a choice. I can just keep doing the same thing that I've always done, and maybe that's appropriate. But I might choose to, hey, wait a minute, I've slowed things down. I've looked at it from a different perspective now. I might choose to do something different. I might choose not to lash out. I might choose to not send that email yet. And just kind of, and just sit with that feeling for a moment before I do anything else. And so every time that we stop and we do something different, we're literally creating new networks in our brain. So there's a phrase that the neurons that fire together wire together. So when you practice this over and over again, that, you know, you're creating new paths in your brain to be able to do things differently. And this works just the same as when you're dealing with, you know, substance use or any kind of addiction, in the same manner. So I always tell people, hey, don't just wait till you're in the midst of it to practice it. Set your phone for random times during the day, and whenever it goes off, just stop and just, you know, take a few breaths, observe what's going on. You might be eating a bunch of junk food at the moment it goes off, and you're going to stop and say, okay, wait a minute. Do I need to finish this pint of Graters at this particular moment? Or do I notice that, hey, you know what, I'm stress eating, and this is what's going on with me right now. So maybe I'm going to put that down and decide to do something else. So practicing it during the day, I think really helps you. So then when you need it, you can access it a lot. It's kind of like, you know, calling a sponsor. You know, we tell people to practice calling a sponsor because it becomes just habitual, and it's a good habit, and not wait until, you know, it's a crisis, and, you know, then it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, and the practice part is the time, the effort that each of us has to put in, whether you're wanting to bake the best cake in the world, whether you're working on yourself, whether you're trying to grow a business or whatever that is, but it all takes practice, and you can't learn everything. You can't solve all the problems. You can't suddenly, again, it's not a red pill, blue pill kind of thing. And so I've noticed that just when you think that you got something down, you get humbled again, you know, again, it resurfaces or something comes up. But what I do notice, and over time, is that as you're practicing, something that used to trigger you, get you upset, may not get you as upset, or it may not trigger. Or if you do get triggered, you're not in that state of upset for, maybe it would last for weeks. Now it's only a couple days, or maybe it's a couple hours or a couple minutes. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, you probably work with a lot of that as well, and trying to just get people, it's almost like chunking, you know, for your own self, you know. But I do love that. That's a great, that stop, and then literally setting an alarm and making something, whether you want to do it 12 times every hour or whether you want to just do it twice a day. But it's also, I was thinking, like, that would be a great time to write down where you're at, and keep a journal and keep a log of what's going on. And so they can kind of see their own patterns. And so that's my next question to you before we finish up here, is that you notice, I'm assuming with a lot of people, to get them to notice their own patterns, which end up, so it's kind of like like you were saying, the definition of insanity, right? So we don't want to keep doing those same patterns if they keep ending us up, you know, in a train wreck kind of situation. So that's why I try to do those types of things in my own life.
Oh, that's beautiful, because practice is so important that, you know, we can talk intellectually forever, but action is really what's going to cement things and cause the changes to occur. And I talk to this with family members all the time, in that one of the things they need to understand about addictions is that it's a process. So that means that requires patience, but also the skills that I'm going to go over with them about how to communicate, they got to practice them. And sometimes they're not going to go well. And so you come back and you practice them again, and we go over them again. Well, what went right? What didn't go as well? And it's that constant practice, because if you've been talking to somebody one way all the time and expecting them to act a certain way, or like, why aren't they acting like the other kids? You know, you're not going to get through to them. So the idea that I always try to explain to family members is, we're trying to build a collaborative relationship here, because that's the way that's the way things change. And so it's not that you're trying to change the person, but you're inviting that person to change. And there's a big difference with that. So when you talk to them in a way that invites them to change, because you practice the way to communicate, then magical things can happen.
Right. Well, and sometimes it's just trying something on, like, here, try this on and see if this works for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and not every time a problem arises, whether you end up in a shouting match, well, maybe the next time it's like, okay, well, how did we end up in that shouting match? So you start to see that pattern. But then you can start making those nice, subtle adjustments and not giving up. That's probably the biggest thing, you know? whether you got cancer, whether you got addiction, whether you got personal issues. I mean, it's like, you know, not giving up is a key component, but like even the book that I'm reading here, I'll tell everybody, I think I've mentioned this before, this Power of Now book. Okay. That's the Cliff Notes version. Eckhart Tolle is the first of that, but just an amazing, but staying so in the moment helps and getting people to that point. But it's great how they point out like how we get hung up on time, how we get hung up on so many other little different things, which basically means that we're worried, we're fearful. We got, you know, anytime we're in anxiety, depression, all this stuff's going on, right? It's like, are we truly present? Like, oh my gosh, like I am so caught up into my head. It's ridiculous, right? Anyhow, I don't know where I was going with that. Mark, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to doing this. I know that everybody's really going to appreciate some of these helpful tips, whether it's for them or their family. Before we get out of here, so give people, again, how they can contact you, you know, website, Facebook, best number to reach you, emails, those sort of things.
Sure. And I'll see if I can put this on the end of the YouTube video to make it easier for people.
Yes.
But so my business is called Minds at Peace, with the goal of actually trying to help people get their minds to peace. And so it's at mindsatpeace.net, although I also own mindsatpeace.com. But my email is at mark, M-A-R-K, at mindsatpeace.net. And my phone number is 513-666-1413, 666-1413. And I'll put, if you go on Facebook and just search for Minds at Peace, if you're local, you should be able, that should come up right away to be able to find me there as well. And then I do put out a newsletter too. Yes.
Tell our audience here one thing that most people don't know about you that they would kind of be astonished about.
Well, so there's one thing, I don't know, I keep telling a lot of people about it, so maybe more people know about it than not, but I don't know how much your audience would. So I've written actually a rock musical about heroin and addiction that was scheduled to actually open on May 29th, but because of the virus, we're doing their responsible thing and not proceeding at this particular point in time. But the whole goal of the show is to actually save lives by reducing stigma. And so I'm presenting addiction in a unique but intimate way, and in an entertaining format, so that people will walk away seeing things differently. And the company that I'm working with, we plan on doing talk backs at the end of each show. So whenever we actually get this, whether it's the end of later this year or next year, there'll be an opportunity to actually engage the community in the topics that were brought up in the show, and then hopefully move things forward so that if stigma is reduced, people are able to talk about things a lot easier, and that really can save lives. I don't care what the addiction is. So that's kind of one of the things that maybe not everybody knows, but hopefully down the road everybody will know. Yeah, you know. But
are you going to be in the play?
I am not. No.
Okay.
Get other actors. I'd be too nervous to be doing it myself. So I'm just doing I've written the music and the lyrics and the book, but happy to have other people sing my songs.
Gotcha. Well, again, I want to thank you, Mark, and just for sharing what you've shared. I know it's even helped me just in having this dialogue, because a lot of times we need to hear what we're speaking, and definitely, God brings people into our lives for a reason. And sometimes it may be that guy who's a jerk or whatever, but in this moment, of course, you're not a jerk. You're a wonderful, supportive, providing incredible options, education, guidance. And so I would highly recommend if anybody is, like I said, dealing with addiction themselves, needing some coaching, even if you don't have an addiction problem, or whether you're dealing or have a family member or loved one that could use Mark's services. It's wonderful. So the website again is
mindsatpeace.net.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you, Rodney. It's been great.
All right.
I really enjoyed this.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.